This is an HOA story about taking the head of the HOA off. A friend of mine not long ago painted his house. He lives in a development that has an HOA. He admits that he and his wife made the first mistake by not reading the HOA handbook close enough, so they didn't realize that they had to get the color approved by the HOA. On the first day of painting, the head of the HOA stopped by and talked to them, made small talk, talked about ways to make painting the house easier, and so on. At this time, the HOA head knew that they hadn't gotten the color approved because he sits on the 3-person panel that approves the colors. However, he opted to not say anything to them. Instead, he waited until they had the entire house painted and then told them that the color was not approved because there are too many other houses with a similar color. It was a lighter shade of green. So, faced with having to spend the time and money to repaint the entire house, he and his wife decided to get a little revenge. They submitted the form and the color swatch for the new color and were approved. Knowing the panel had to take time out of their lives to meet every time that they submit a color, they decided to submit another color swatch and form, saying that they had changed their minds. This color was one that they knew would never be approved. As assumed, it was denied. They had to submit again, and again they submitted a color they knew would never be approved. Again, they were denied. They repeated this 4 or 5 times before the HOA head contacted them and told them that the first swatch they submitted was still approved and to not submit another swatch for approval, that they were tired of playing games. He replied telling him that it turns out that the color is no longer available and that they needed to submit one last swatch, which, of course, was a color they knew wouldn't be approved. This time, the HOA told them that if they submitted another unapprovable swatch, they would be fined and billed for the panel's time. He submitted another swatch that was a color that he knew would never be approved, and with it, a photocopy of the page from the handbook covering the process of getting a color approved. He pointed out that there was nothing in there that mentioned any limit to a number of swatches that a person could submit. This entire process took a few months. After 8 or 9 swatches that were denied, the head of the HOA was fuming mad and showed up at their door, telling them that he wasn't leaving until they had decided on a color for the house. My friend pointed out that the handbook says the only way for a color to be approved was with a vote from the full panel. The HOA head called the 2 other people, and they came over, and once they were all sat down, he and his wife shuffled through about 10 different swatches of crazy colors before finally showing them one that was a light green color. Frustrated, they approved it and left. A few weeks later, the head of the HOA contacted him to see when they were going to paint, and he told them they already had. The swatch that they approved was the color that the house was already painted. A week later, he got an angry letter from the HOA and a bill for their time. He refused to pay and will fight it. A couple of weeks after that, everyone got a revised handbook in the mail with very detailed rules on how to get a color approved. My friend then called the head of the HOA and told him all of this could have just been avoided if he had just said something that day when he came over and talked to them as they started painting. But he decided to be a jerk, so they decided to be jerks back to him. Now, I'm no expert on the lien and fine situation and how that all plays out. I was just going off of something I was told. Apparently, if he doesn't pay the fine, they can file a lien against him and they could foreclose on his house. When I told him this, he explained that the handbook actually had a detailed procedure on how fines are to be handed out and collected. There's apparently a few steps that the HOA has to take before they'll file a lien, and none of those have happened yet. The fine is $300, so if it escalates to the next step and they try to collect the money, he will take action, even if that means swallowing his pride and paying. He's going to double check just to make sure they haven't tried to file a lien on the sly. Isn't it satisfying to get away with just getting back at the HOA? What do you think? This one's called Revolution Against Our HOA, posted by Deleted. My wife and I moved into a 64 townhome community that was 10 years old at the time. The HOA board was comprised of 5 members that were original homeowners when the community started and had been the sole board members since the community started. Their sense of entitlement was backcrap crazy. They thrived on their quarterly walkthrough of the neighborhood as they would write up every single home for some kind of violation, regardless of how minor the offenses were. Everyone gets a violation letter. Our first letter, the first month living there, was that our garage door paint was starting to peel. It was a 2 centimeter scrape where the panels met. It needed to be repainted, the siding needed to be power washed, there was a patch of green moss behind a bush, and the sliding door on the deck was dirty. There was dirt on the bottom of the door from recent rain, and it needed to be washed. We had 30 days to fix the issues or begin accruing a fee of $25 a day until they're resolved. I asked around, and everyone gets these ridiculously petty letters every quarter. No matter what you did to maintain your townhome, you were going to get a letter about something. And as this was going on, none of the major items the neighborhood needed fixed were addressed. After a decade since the construction, the ground had settled unevenly and many homes had standing water issues where it wouldn't drain after a storm. The rainwater would sit for 5 to 7 days in people's lawns. And, more importantly, there had been a legal fight with the town since the community started about our road being dedicated, meaning that the town was responsible for snow removal. Our HOA dues included paying for our own snow removal, which we shouldn't have to, and we were paying an attorney for 10 years to fight this, with no resolution in sight. Fast forward 2 years, and a few of us had enough, and we decided to band together to replace the board at the next annual meeting. The existing board got wind of this and hit us all with pages worth of issues with our properties, since if you have outstanding issues, you are not in good standing with the community. Thus, you cannot run for a board position or even vote for those running. This petty move brought the community even closer, and we all spent the weekend before the meeting helping each other clean out their HOA honeydew list. We took pictures, documented everything, then we had the US Mail certified delivery of each packet with the completed list and photos to the HOA board who lived 75 feet away. Come board night, oddly enough, the lawyer was there to give an update that no progress has been made with the township on dedicating our road. He stuck around as we moved to the elections for the next board. We brought our signed petitions to add our names to the ballot. The board says we're not eligible as we all have outstanding issues with our property. We call bullcrap with our receipts from the post office that they received, our completed list with documentation. They reply that they haven't reviewed them yet, and we tell them that that's not our problem and we are in good standing. Their lawyer overhears this and he states we are eligible to be on the ballot if we can confirm the issues with our homes were resolved prior to the meeting. The HOA president glares at the lawyer, but the lawyer just shrugs, saying, "The rules are the rules." With the exception of the 5 existing board members voting for themselves or each other, we are voted in nearly unanimously to replace them. I lead the revolution because I was tired of the petty bullcrap when there were real problems in the neighborhood. Sadly, the rest of the elected board members vote me as president. I have no idea what I'm doing, but we spent the next few sessions removing all the dumb violations from most of the neighbors. We went through the bylaws to really focus on what's important. What happens next? It ends up that the lawyer was a friend of the previous president and was in no hurry to resolve anything as he was enjoying our excessive bill. I notify him that if it's not resolved in the next 6 months, we're finding new representation. He was actually good at his job when pressed to do it. He won the case, the town appealed, and they tried to drag it out. He fast-tracked the appeal as it had been going on for 10 years, and we won the appeal too. The town dedicated our road, and then the lawyer pressed that it should have been done years ago, and it wasn't him slowing things down, but the town. He ends up getting us a settlement from the judge for back pay on us paying the snow removal that the town was responsible for. We ended up using that settlement to have French drains installed across much of the community to clear the standing water issues. With the money left over, we fixed a lot of the neighborhood issues that the HOA should have been doing the whole time. Fences and sidewalks in disrepair, replaced dead trees and shrubs, and so on. It was great getting all that done without having to hit our capital reserve fund. I remained president until we moved out a few years ago. Our family began to outgrow the townhome, and now we live in a new, larger development with a new HOA. I was asked to run for a position on it, and I replied, not a freaking chance, but I will lead a coup d'etat if I need to. An update. As to the original HOA president, 50-year-old male, he wasn't actually eligible to be president. He wasn't on the mortgage. The townhome was in his mom's name. No one knew because he held the books. So, being the vengeful leader at the next annual meeting, I wait until Express shows up with his petition to try and get his position back. I tell him, in front of the other 60-plus homeowners, that he can't even be at the meeting, let alone vote or be on a ballot, as his name isn't on the property. But his mom is eligible if she wants to. That was embarrassing enough for the entitled little jerk. HOA thinks our residential building is a hotel, posted by Putrid Ad 695. My country has HOAs for multiple owner occupancy buildings, and I need to rant about my family's HOA. My parents have retired into a semi-touristy area near the mountains. They bought an apartment in a building where about half of the owners rent theirs out for tourists. The other half lives in the building. The building is registered as a residential building, and even the HOA bylaws declare it a residential building. It's legal to rent out as long as it's not done commercially. However, over the last 10 years, the owners participating in tourist rentals have banded together and introduced a hotel reception with 2 full-time employees and a website, all paid for by the HOA fees because the rental pool, as they call themselves, control the HOA. They've used that to bully the residents. First off, shortly before my parents bought the apartment, the HOA decided, instead of paying for routine maintenance on the communally owned parking garage door, to just get rid of that garage containing mostly residents' parking spots. Those spots were private property. They decided this was against the will of some of the owners. Next up, they make residents help cover the bill for the reception and employees. And then they forbid residents from doing renovations or any other loud activities during vacation season, which is nearly all year round, like ski season, hiking seasons, and summer, so they don't disrupt guests. They say guests have priority. They allow guests to throw loud parties and throw their trash in the garden because it comes with the territory of living in a hotel. They won't even allow changes to the outdated patios because it ruins the hotel's uniformity. My parents did it anyway and caused the first huge fight between the rental pool and the residents. The fire department recently did a fire safety check, which is unusual for a residential building. They discovered the building was missing escape route signage and told us that we only needed them if the building was used and registered commercially. The HOA now wants to buy extremely expensive signs and bill all the owners, including residents, several $1,000s. The building is still registered residentially. This is currently the straw breaking the camel's back. I'm now helping my parents sue the HOA in the city to enforce the building's status as residential and force the rental pool to stop commercial usage or to stop billing residents for commercial usage. The twist is, one of the HOA board members who absolutely hated my parents for fighting against the HOA recently quit renting out and moved into his apartment. In response, my mom snarkily suggested that he renovate his patio to make it nicer for himself. He's also suddenly very bothered by noisy guests. Last weekend, he asked my parents out for a beer and advice on patio renovations that he plans on doing this fall during hiking season. This comment tells OP to consult whatever the country's city planning is, and then OP says, they know, it's a small village, they just don't really care, which is why we're suing them. We're hoping to get the board member on our side. He has some influence with other board members. And then we might be able to fire the subcontractor that runs the daily HOA operations. We've considered notifying the tax authority, but we're hesitant to subject them to potential criminal investigations. But the lawsuit has pretty good chances. The courts can't turn a blind eye. This is the part that bothers the other residents. They haven't really cared much or haven't been able to fight due to age and health issues. It's all retirees. My parents can't legally sue over things like the parking spot since it doesn't affect them personally, and the HOA dropped the patio fight in order to avoid a lawsuit. Everyone has just tolerated it for years since it didn't cost much, but the additional fire safety measures for a hotel will cost thousands. It's not just signs. 2 apartments have been declared temporarily uninhabitable due to missing escape routes. More residents' parking spots would need to be removed. We would basically have to get rid of the garden. It wasn't built to be a hotel, and significant parts of the building would need to be redone in the future. All of these things are long-term issues, and the current fight is only about the signs which need to be done immediately. But if we allow that, they could argue that we've legally accepted commercial usage, and they could possibly apply for a commercial permit. Everyone was used to the running cost and didn't really notice them in between the regular residential running cost or had no energy to fight them. The residents are all elderly, some with cancer or other severe health issues. This is the first time they would actually send a separate bill for something that the residents don't need. And my parents have been arguing about it since they bought the apartment. Don't want my help? Sure, go ahead and get yourself fired. A bit of background. A while back, when I was still in high school, I worked at the local cinema to earn a bit of pocket money and experience. I stayed for a couple years, working weekends when school was in session. I think it was halfway into my second year when the target of this revenge came into the picture. We'll call him Luke. Luke was a new hire and was just learning the ropes. Now, this was common as turnover was high since we were all students. He seemed alright at first, and everyone was nice to him since we were all pretty close and knew one another from school, and well, we welcomed him in. I don't think even a week passed before the problems started. The first issue I heard of was that Luke was trying to flirt with one of the girls. Thing was, this girl was already in a relationship with one of the other employees, and everyone knew this, including Luke. That didn't stop him though, and eventually the girl told him to his face to cut it out. It only got worse from there. Now, I do my best to see the good in people and to give them the benefit of the doubt. Despite what others were saying, I still tried to get along with him. This unfortunately changed during the first real conversation I had with him. We were on break at the same time, and about 5 of us crowded into the little break room for lunch. I forget what exactly we were talking about, but I remember that it was a pretty uncomfortable topic, and Luke was using a lot of explicatives. The break room was not soundproof, and there were patrons outside, especially children. I tried to warn him about using that language so loudly, and that he might get in trouble if a customer heard him. Immediately, his attitude toward me changed, and he responded with something along the lines of, "I can say what I want. I have the right to free speech. Don't tell me what to do." What? Sheesh, okay, chill. I was just concerned, but you do you. A few minutes later, the convo had switched to high school, and Luke was raving about how Caucasians were the majority in all the high schools in our district. Now, for my high school, this isn't true, as most of the community and students attending were Latino and made up about 70% of our student body. I told him as much. I said, "Well, that's not the case for our high school." Luke says, yeah, it is. White's the majority everywhere. I have a friend that goes there. Hey, Luke, I actually go there. It's mostly, "Why are you talking?" he replied. I said, "Excuse me?" Luke said, "Who invited you to this conversation? I wasn't talking to you. Who asked?" Now, this irritated me. Now, I know it's a joke about looking for who asked, but this was before that became a thing, and I found it extremely rude. But in a moment of clarity, the best comeback came to mind. Like arguing in the shower by yourself, and to this day, I could only wish to be able to recreate the moment. Smiling, I threw his words right back into his face. Free speech. The others at the table were laughing as I threw away the rest of my lunch and left the break room. My heart was beating so fast from the weird adrenaline rush that I got, and I spent the rest of my break in the back of the concessions until it was time to clock back in. I think that convo was what sparked Luke's hatred of me. Ever since then, he would glare at me whenever I walked by, would dump the trash from his bin when we were sweeping the floors for me to pick up, and generally was a jerk. His behavior kept getting worse. He would threaten to fight people, and he was a short potato of a boy, really, so no one was really actually scared. He would argue, say rude, passive-aggressive, or downright racial things, and was generally just a jerk. At some point during a shift that I wasn't there, he cornered the girl that he'd been eyeing and kept verbally harassing her to the point that she hid in the manager's office where he couldn't get to her. She was a sweet and loyal girl and a friend, and she and her boyfriend could be described with the phrase puppy love and had been together for a long time. The boyfriend was angry when she texted the group chat about what had happened and wanted to get Luke fired. However, people were hesitant about this, saying that the managers wouldn't want to because he claimed discrimination, he was trans, and that he hadn't done anything blatantly wrong. Then another one of the employees made a suggestion. Luke was incompetent. We all knew this, so why not make the manager see it too? Revenge time. It wasn't hard to do, since Luke would tend to shoot himself in the foot. When possible, we'd point him out to the managers when reviewing the cameras in the halls about him dumping his trash can when sweeping onto the ground in front of patrons. When he was cursing up a storm during break, a text would be sent and someone would lead a manager to him to be caught. He rarely cleaned up. He was rude and loud, and the incident with the girl didn't help his case. It still wasn't enough, and week after week, his name was on the schedule. Then, my opportunity came. See, at the cinema, there's a position called Point, aka the ticket taker, that lets you into the theater area. It's the second most dreaded position, and the first being self-serve cleanup, as you have to stand in place and interact with customers at a rapid-fire pace, smiling and listening for theaters to be called at the same time. When the night ends, the last person on point has to close and clean the self-serve stations. Today, to my initial dread, Luke and I were both on point. The entire time, Luke would leave his station and pace the lobby, toward me and then back, not even sweeping the ground as he went. He wasn't supposed to leave point, and he had to walk around customers to get back to his podium to help them. He was told off by a manager once or twice for this, but continued his antics anyway. Then, as things slowed down, one of the managers approached me and told me that we were going down to one point, which is one person at the center, rather than at both entrances, and that I'd have to explain to Luke how to close point before I went back to help clean concessions. It had to be this way, since I had already taken the sanitation test and Luke had yet to do so, and therefore wasn't allowed behind concessions. When I finished closing my point, I walked over to Luke and told him to move his podium to the center so he could take closing point. He did, though scowling at me. When he was set, I began to explain. I said, "So you'll be closing point tonight after the last movie starts, and you'll need to go to the—" "Go away." What? "I don't need your help, so don't talk to me." "But I need to teach you how to close point." I don't care, shut up." I know you don't like me, but this is work, so you need to—" "No, I don't want your help. Shut the heck up." "But frick off and don't talk to me." At this point, I was beyond upset. I was furious. I was trying to help even after he had acted how he had treated everyone here. I didn't care what he said in the break room, but it shouldn't affect work. This was ridiculous. I must have snapped or something, because I complied, walking away saying, "Fine, I don't care, don't ever talk to me again." "Hey," I said. I waved my hand over my shoulder. "Don't talk to me ever again." I went behind concessions to help, where he couldn't reach me. I don't know when, but I started crying out of frustration, and one of my friends came and hugged me, bringing me to a corner to cool down. I don't get angry often, and when I do, it makes me scared. I was just sick of his antics, sick of the way he spoke to me, just sick of his attitude. I'm not sure how long that I sat back there, but soon enough that same friend came and waved me to the front of concessions. I wiped my face and walked out, and he pointed to point. There was Luke, being instructed by the manager on how to close point, and the manager did not look happy with him. Arms folded, frowning, flat tone, everything spoke of irritation. My friend said that they'd already explained that Luke refused my help when the manager asked him what was going on, as point can be seen and heard from almost the entire lobby. Seeing that scene lifted my spirits a bit, and I was able to end the night relatively easily. The next weekend, when the schedule came out, I didn't even have to check my email. It was posted in the group text, specifically the section with Luke's name. It was blacked out. If he had quit, his name would have been removed. But the fact that it was blacked out meant it was a sudden event. Luke had been fired. I'm not sure what it was that they fired him for anymore, but considering that we were always low on staff and they had to worry about discrimination, I'm guessing there were enough complaints that they had to fire him. I'd like to think that the last interaction that I had with him was the final nail in the coffin, but I was just glad to see him go more than anything. I heard he worked at a common fast food place for a while, but ended up getting McFired from there too. Good luck in life, Luke. You weren't missed. HOA takedown. HOA destroys my property, but I'm not even part of the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you don't miss this crazy fallout, and I'll see you there.